Hello, welcome to Lesson 2. Today we're going to learn about logic statements. By the end of the hour, you should be able to write the converse, inverse, and contrapositive of a conditional statement. Right now, you might not know what any of those words mean, but by the end of the hour, hopefully you do. Now, a logical argument consists of a set of premises and a conclusion. Each given statement is called a premise, and then the statement arrived at through the reasoning is called a conclusion. Now think of this when you use deductive reasoning. Think of a murder scene. A detective comes on the scene and he sees a bloody knife, a body that's been stabbed, and then he finds maybe some DNA under the person's fingers, and then he concludes that there was a struggle between this person and whoever DNA it is. Whatever he finds from that evidence is called the conclusion. All of the things like the bloody knife, the person on the floor, those are the premises. Now this page is a lot of writing, and this is actually in your homework. So you don't have to write all of this down because it's actually just in your homework problems. But if you want to write down, go right ahead. A conditional statement is a compound statement formed by combining two statements, a hypothesis and a conclusion, usually by using the words if and then. A converse is formed by switching the hypothesis and the conclusion in the original statement. So if then to not move. So what this, the if and then don't move. That didn't make sense at first. So if I say if I like cats, then I like a mammal. Now, a converse flips that around, where it flips everything after the if and everything after the then around. So I'd say if I like a mammal, then I like cats. Now, an inverse is a different type of statement where it takes the conditional and is formed by negating the hypothesis and negating the conclusion. So by negating, it means we're turning it from a positive statement to a negative, or a negative to a positive. Here, if I like cats, to negate that, I would say if I do not like cats. So I could write this by saying if I do not like cats, then now I negate the conclusion. So I say I don't like a mammal. Now our final statement we're going to learn about today is a contrapositive. A contrapositive is formed by negating both parts and interchanging the resulting negation. A lot of words. What we're doing is we're taking our original statement, flipping it around like we do in the converse, and then we negate both of them. So we would say if I don't like a mammal, then I don't like cats. All right, so there are your four things: conditional, converse, inverse, and contrapositive. Now we can write this in a notation we call it logician shorthand, where P goes to Q. So what that would be saying is let P be I study and Q be I get good grades. Then P goes to Q would mean if I study, then I get good grades. Now, if I can write all of those things, the statement, which is the conditional statement, the converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive, by saying if P then Q, or the converse would be if Q then P. The inverse, if not P, so this little squiggly here means not. So if not P, then not Q. And the contrapositive says if not Q, then not P. Now, this would be something good to write down in your notes. So it would be good to pause the video and make sure you have all of those, because this is a quick way to remember how to make each statement. And remember, the squiggly means you're negating that statement. All right, now let's take a look at this. We're going to start with one. If two angles are vertical angles, then they are congruent. That's a conditional statement. My converse would be if P then Q. So if this statement is if P, so this whole thing references P, then Q, the last part all references Q. So if I want to write this if Q then P, we start if they are congruent. Now it doesn't really make sense to start a statement if they are congruent because we don't know what they are. So we have to write what they refers to. So you think, what does they refer to in this problem? They refers to two angles. So we would say if two angles are congruent, then P, which is this first part. Now two angles, we can write two angles again, but we could also just turn that to a they, because we've already referred to it. All right. Now my inverse is if not P, so I have to negate this first part. So I would say if two angles are not vertical angles, then I have to negate the second part, then they are not congruent. Now my last one, if not Q, so I'm going to negate this thing first. If they are not congruent, then they are not vertical angles. All right. Now we have to assess whether all of these statements are true, if some of them are true, some of them are false. So let's take a look at the original statement. If two angles are vertical angles, then they are congruent. It has some terms here, vertical angles and congruent. Congruence, it means that two shapes, so angles, line segments, they're congruent if they're exactly the same size. Numbers can be equal to each other, but shapes will be congruent to each other. And vertical angles, if we draw two lines like this, say if I know this side is 40 degrees. The side that's vertical with this is the side over here. Now, I think you guys have learned somewhere along the line that these two will actually be the same value. So this statement is true. If two angles are vertical angles, then they are congruent. So we can write true up here. Now the converse, if two angles are congruent, then they are I wrote congruent, but I should have wrote vertical angles. Hopefully you guys caught my mistake. Sorry about that. So if two angles are congruent, then they are vertical angles. So if I just have two angles are congruent, do they have to be vertical angles? Hopefully you're saying no. So if I want to make a counterexample, all I need is one thing one example that makes this not true. So let's draw one angle that's 20 degrees and another angle over here that's, say, 20 degrees. And are these vertical angles? No, they're not vertical angles. So they're congruent, but they're not vertical angles, so that makes this statement false. Now the next statement, the inverse, if two angles are not vertical angles, then they are not congruent. So if I find two angles that are not vertical angles, let's take these two, are not vertical angles, then they are not congruent. Well, this is a counterexample for this also, because these are congruent. So this would also be false. Finally, our last statement, our contrapositive, if they are not congruent, so I should have said if two angles are not congruent, then they are not vertical angles. So if I have two angles that are not congruent, is it possible for them to be vertical angles? No. So I think this will be true, because if they're not vertical angles, or if they're not congruent, then they can't be vertical angles. So this one will be true. All right. Now here is a problem. I want you guys to take a second, pause the video, and write your converse, your inverse, and your contrapositive on some notes. All right, hopefully everybody has done this problem. So now we're going to show you each answer. The converse will be if a triangle is equilateral, then all three sides are congruent. For inverse, if all three sides of a triangle are not equal, then the triangle is not equilateral. And for contrapositive, if a triangle is not equilateral, then the three sides of a triangle are not equal. All right. Hopefully this is making sense for you. Now I want you guys to take a second, look at this, and pause the video and see if you can do this with the person sitting next to you. All right, hopefully you guys were able to talk that one out. And now if we look and see which statements are true, up here, the original and the contrapositive were true, but these two are false. In this situation, we didn't really talk about that yet, but if three sides of a triangle are equal, then it's equilateral. This is going to be true. If it's equilateral, then all three sides are congruent. That's going to be true. If all three sides of a triangle are not equal, then the triangle is not equilateral. That is also true. And if a triangle is not equilateral, then all three sides of a triangle are not equilateral, or not equal. That will be true. So in this situation, all four statements will be true. Well, the one thing that we're going to know is if the conditional statement is true, then the contrapositive is also true. This is the law of contrapositives. All right. If that works out for you, you can start on the homework. Good luck.